Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tea Time with Jesse. I'm your host, Jesse, and I'm here today with a very good friend of mine, old Beijing buddy, now here in Taipei, where we're filming today's episode, Terrence Hsieh.
Hey, man, it's been great to see you.
It's good. I mean, Terry and I hung out a ton back when we were in Beijing, and we were both performers of different types. I was a comedian. You're a musician.
Yep.
Jazz musician and like a pop star now of some way. You play for big pop stars.
Yeah.
Produce music. Terry was on a lot of the. What are some of the TV shows you did back in the mainland?
Back in the day, it was like 我是歌手.
Yeah.
It was like I'm a singer.
Yeah.
蒙面唱将,
So like the Masked Singer.
Yeah, the Masked Singer, shows like that.
It's really great to be able to hang out with Terry. He's one of the people that I was most excited to see when I came back to Taiwan, and we're going to be drinking some oolong today.
All right.
So this is by the time this airs, you can give it a smell. This is the roast oolong. By the time this thing airs, we're going to have a Taiwan box on there with more information. But this is a roasted Alishan Oolong, and the oolongs here are really good. Like, this is what I was excited for when I came to Taiwan, was the oolongs. And even there's such a variety between like very lightly oxidized, completely unroasted. It's basically like sweet water, and then like very heavy charcoal, roasted, like very sort of like dense. This is somewhere in the middle. But it's been great to be able to discover the oolongs here. So
what do you look for in an oolong?
The first thing is to understand what you're drinking, because if you get an oolong that is like light, you don't want to be like, it tastes kind of like sweet water. Where's the flavor? And similarly, if you're looking for something light and you get the heavy charcoal, handmade, roasted stuff, you're like, this tastes like, it's like a cigar. What's going on? So finding out what you like and where you like on that spectrum is cool. It's almost like within oolong by itself, you have many, many different teas. And then personally, what I look for is I like for there to be a lot going on, but none of it is like too strong. So it's sweet, but not too sweet. It's like it got some deeper flavors and a little astringency, but like not bitter, and so when I find a tea that's really like balanced like that and easy drinking, that's kind of what I'm looking for. And then also, if you can, getting as close to the farmers as possible, just because you get a better deal that way. So whatever you're drinking, if you can cut out as many middlemen as possible, that's the way to do it.
That goes with life, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So life is a process of cutting out middlemen. You take a look at that color. So really clear. That's another thing you want to look for, is good color, but like very clear. A lot of good clarity there. The Taiwanese actually drink this first steep. Normally I would wash it out with like pu'er or whatever, but they've been saying especially with the good quality stuff, you don't need to worry about that. So cheers, man. Yeah. Tea time in Taipei.
Ooh, yeah.
Been good. What do you think? Ah, excellent.
It's light, but it's also like, there's a fruitiness to it.
Yeah, it's got like fruity, a little body, and it'll open up and get darker, especially as we get going. So I always like hearing your take on making stuff in China and Asia, because we're very similar in some ways, but also very different. So I think we're similar in the sense that we've all had this market of performing that's been in China, Mandarin language stuff, dealing with the Chinese TV, Chinese media system, now exploring what Taiwan has to offer. But also, you're a Chinese American, which changes everything about the way that the industry sees you and deals with you.
That's true.
And so what kind of made you want to do your music in Asia in the first place? Because you grew up in the States.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really grow up speaking Chinese. Or actually, when I went to college, I really wanted to study Chinese, because that was something I felt a little bit of, I guess you could say, shame about, not being able to speak Chinese as a Chinese American. We would always have these dinners, and my dad would have colleagues from China. He's a professor, and they would be like, "Oh, so which one of you doesn't speak Chinese?" My brother and I were both like,
which must have not been fun at all.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of I wouldn't say shame. Yeah, I guess you could say shame. Yeah, when it comes when Chinese people see each other and then their kids can't speak the language, don't really have a connection to the culture, and they're like, they're not connected.
It feels like the world is in a couple generations, we'll all just be the same,
people, right?
Yeah, exactly. Was it intimidating to look at the idea of studying Chinese, though, as a Chinese American, and starting kind of from scratch?
I mean, I had a couple of years of Chinese school when I was a little kid, and I knew how to speak some very basic phrases. I can ask, go to the bathroom and stuff.
Yeah.
But for me, the intimidation part was when you start learning Chinese and you go to the country, I think this is with like a lot of Asian countries too. People look at you like you should be able to speak the language.
Their expectations for you are very different than me.
Right. So when you go there, they look at you and they think, oh yeah, you speak great Chinese.
Yeah.
No matter what
or you go like ni hao. They're like, wow, you're doing really hao,
Right.
Or you can be. I had a joke on that, which is like, I've been here 9 years, but like I don't know if my Chinese has gotten any better because people said it was good the first day. I landed like ni hao. Anyway, so you were in locally with the Chinese music, jazz, pop scene. What was it like?
To be a musician in Beijing, I mean, at the time when I first moved there, to be a jazz musician, I mean, it's pretty much like a life that you would have as a musician anywhere else, which may be surprising to some people actually. If you go to a place like New York where you're a jazz musician, you're doing a lot of things that are not jazz, like you're teaching, you're doing a lot of trying to take as much corporate gigs as possible, and just so that you don't have to have the pain of like playing music that you don't want to play, and to play the gigs that you do want to play.
So like most people would rather play a corporate jazz gig than like, play type of music or like get a day job that they didn't want to do.
Exactly. So, or, I mean, you just have to do something to make up the difference. So a lot of people do teaching, like teach music. There's a music academy in Tongzhou called 现代乐学院, and so a lot of my fellow jazz musicians taught there. I taught at afternoon jazz programs at one of the international schools in Beijing, International School of Beijing.
Yeah. I mean, I remember my first year of doing Chinese comedy full time. Did I tell you about the 7-year-old's birthday party I did?
Yeah, you did. I remember.
The funny, so there was this. I got a call. They're like, somebody has a birthday party. Like, show up at this restaurant, and it turned out to be a 7-year-old whose parents, I guess she liked listening to the radio, and so they were like, that's a talk show, right? And in Chinese, the word for stand-up is 脱口秀. So they're like, my 7-year-old likes talk show, and so they hired me as a stand-up comedian. And the other thing is they didn't have a private room. It was just in the restaurant. Like, it was just like, they were one table amongst other people, and no mic or anything. I guess I'm just like doing my bits for this table. Like I showed up as like a bad waiter who was like trying to like make people laugh to get better tips. And I did, and I'm like, I'm going to eat it. And I ate it for 12 minutes and I bounced, and I probably got a bigger tip than the waiter. So
there you go. There you go.
But like, that's the sort of gig you got to take in the beginning.
Right.
And then at that time, what did you think it would be like when you made it in the scene? And was it actually different from when you actually grew in and became more like a bigger member of the scene?
Well, I mean, I think there's a difference between being a jazz musician and what I do now, which is producing and working in the pop music industry in China and Taiwan. And for a jazz musician, I was really, your kind of goal is just to kind of make it playing your own music. If you can be a couple different routes. You can be a sideman, which means that you play for other people. And there's not that many jazz musicians in Beijing. So we're kind of a small, isolated community, but very integrated with local musicians and foreign musicians together. So the foreign musicians all speak fantastic Chinese, and so we all, the lingua franca in the jazz community there is Chinese.
Because jazz is like originally, was created by Black Americans. And like, do you feel like in some way, like as a Chinese American and them as maybe Chinese or Italian or whatever, because is almost everybody coming to this almost as a second culture because of that creative where it started?
And I think it's really interesting that in China, you had a ban on Western music from 49 until 1978, really, when when the end of the Cultural Revolution happened, when they officially kind of began opening up the country. And so every other country in the world has had direct access to jazz music for those like 30 years or 30 some odd years. but China did not.
Yeah, it broke for a while. How do you think it changed the way that they dealt with the music to have been cut off for 30 years? And let's be honest, like before 49, there was Civil War, there was world, like people weren't listening to jazz, like regular people may not be listening to jazz.
Well, actually, interesting.
Yeah.
So like in the 1930s and the 20s, Buck Clayton, who was Duke Ellington's trumpet player, was in Shanghai for like a 10-year stint. Or
10 years.
Yeah, he was there for quite a while because they basically decided to leave America because they wanted to get out of segregation and all this stuff. They came to China and they had this gig at the Canadrome Ballroom in Shanghai, late 20s, early 30s, right before the Japanese invasion. And Buck Clayton ended up working with this Shanghainese playwright Li Jinghui, and they together basically created the music that was like the foundation of modern Mandopop. Like
really?
Pop music.
Oh.
And essentially what Buck Clayton did was he listened to like the folk melodies from what people were listening to. He said, "Oh, if we can put this over a blues scale, we can do this." And so a lot of that like Shanghai aesthetic.
So it was very jazz bar-y, the sort of old posters and the cigarette box, Qipao on the poster.
A lot of that music was like a collaboration between like Buck Clayton and Li Jinghui. So really, the modern Chinese Mandopop does have black music to thank for as well.
That's crazy. We're going to take a little bit of a break here. We're going to talk a little bit more about the pop music, about doing some big shows. I just really loved hanging out with you in all those jazz shows, so I wanted to get back into jazz. I know you haven't been doing as many jazz shows, but it comes back, man. It all has a way of cycling around. I really do think so. So anyway, I'm Jesse.
I'm Terry.
And we'll be right back in a moment. Hello everybody, Jesse here. I'm back in Los Angeles, and yes, I cut my hair. Thanks again for watching the podcast. We have the second half coming up, but a couple quick notices. One, if you want to listen to the full episode of my interview with Terry, an hour, we have it on the audio podcast, so make sure to go on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever your podcasting platform is. Subscribe and listen to the audio episode. Also, we have a discount code, Terry10, if you want 10% off of your order. This is a podcast-only thing. Go and type in Terry10 to get 10% off your order. This doesn't apply to the new subscription box, unfortunately, but for everything else, you can get 10% off. And if you have not subscribed yet, we do have a new subscription box out. It's really, really great. 3 great teas. I really encourage you to take a look at that. Thanks again. We'll get back to the show. Back with Terry. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Tea Time with Jesse. I'm Jesse, and I'm here with Terence Hsieh, a musician, good friend of mine from the Beijing days, of the Beijing jazz scene, and now in the sort of like greater China pop scene. When you first got into pop, you originally, as you said, you were playing in the back of shows and in concerts. And what was that like to be in like a big arena, playing for whatever 10,000 people or something like that?
Yeah, the first shows I did were just like TV shows, so it was just me staring at a camera. What I did at the beginning was play on a lot of these TV shows. Thank you. And I was hired to be on a lot of these singing competition shows in the backing bands, and so that's what I was primarily doing, was just playing trombone in the backing band. And I did that for transitioning out of being a jazz musician to that started as early as 2014 for me. And I think there was a point where I kind of decided to be a pop musician with a side jazz career rather than being a jazz musician with a side pop career. From that, there have been a couple of big career changes that have happened during my time in the industry that have sort of pushed me towards being a producer, an arranger, and we can talk about some of those things.
So this is the thing, and you've done the production and arranging for your own stuff as well as for like shows and stuff like that. We have actually the vinyl that you gave me. Very cool. There we go. So this is the Adventures of Pie Boy. Very, very cool. So tell us about, how did this happen?
During COVID, so basically what happened, how I ended up in Taipei was I got stuck here. I was playing a show at Xiaojudan, Taipei Arena, with a Taiwanese singer named Ah Lin. And I had gone home, like you, for Chinese New Year. And we weren't sure whether the show was going to happen, so I was originally supposed to fly back to Beijing to pick up some more equipment and then come back to Taipei.
And so you were planning on going back, and then obviously it didn't happen.
Yeah, so I ended up in Taipei, and I couldn't go back to Beijing because as soon as the shows were over, I think around mid-March, they
Yeah, it was shut
down the border, right?
Yeah.
And so for the next 3 years, 2.5 years, I was in Taiwan. I thought about going back to the States, and I thought to myself, like, well, if I go back home, the most I can do is just sit around, just wait for things to come back.
I did that. I made a lot of online comedy,
And it was not wasted, right?
It was not wasted, but it was definitely, it felt like sitting around waiting for things to open up. And it's absurd to think about, but it felt like that from the entire time between when everything shut down until I got the vaccine.
Yeah.
And that was, whatever, 12 months, 13 months, 15 months. Because for the people that came from Asia, we had 2 extra months of COVID craziness where everything shut down in America in March. Our lives were already destroyed for like 5-6 weeks. So you found yourself here in Taipei, and you were like, well, I don't know exactly what I'd do if I go back. So I guess you're like, see what you can do here.
Yeah. So I just started writing music, Spice Cabinet, the band that did this album. So I started working on a new set of music for this band. The difference being that when you are writing music for a jazz band, a lot of times that you really have to rely on the room, like the people playing the music to be together to make the music happen, especially if you're doing a record. But the problem was that the band was split between different places, right?
Yep.
And so I really had to think of a different way. I couldn't just do it purely as a jazz album, or like an album that relied on people to be in the room together to play. And so I started approaching it from a pop music perspective, which is you can plan it all out using technology. And then you can, once you have everything generally planned out in the pop music world, I can send it to LA and have a guy dub strings, or I can send it to New York and have a guy play saxes or guitar or something like that. So during this time, a lot of musicians were trying to think about how to make themselves available online for recording. Fortunately, being in the pop industry, I already had myself set up to work on music in this way. So basically it became just a matter of what is the craziest thing that I can think of, and try and plan those ideas within the music itself, but not in a way that not so rigidly that musicians can't also express themselves over it. So there are certain sections in the album where the music is very rigid, you have to play it this way, you have to exactly cut it off the way that everybody else does. But then there are sections where I send it to Alex, the saxophone, and I say, man, do the weirdest thing you can come up with.
That's fine.
And that's
kind of how it came together. So
that's how it came together, and then that kind of leads into one of the big career changes for me, which was in Taiwan we won the Jinshu for this album, 3 Jinshu.
Yeah. So what is that for people that don't know?
It's sort of like Grammys for Chinese language music.
Would you recommend this is one of the interesting things is I'm Jewish, but I know nothing about Israeli music. It wasn't a part of growing up, or there wasn't anything like that. Do you feel if there are Chinese Americans that are in the States now that maybe are just not listening to Mandopop, do you think they should be? Do you think everybody should be listening to Mandopop? Or is it really just if you dig it, dig it. If not, whatever, do your thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think if people are interested in connecting with their heritage, a cultural heritage from if you're Chinese American, you want to connect with being Chinese in China. If that's something that interests you, I think it's hugely advantageous to listen to the music and the pop culture, not just the pop music, but the pop culture. What movies they like, the lingo, the way that they talk to each other, just the everyday kind of lingua franca of that culture. If you want to connect with that, I think that's a great way to do that, because it shares, from all that pop culture, you can understand their insecurities, you can understand the things that make them sad, make them happy, and if you're able to absorb that, then I think it'll give you a really good
It's just
idea
like
of what they like.
because if you're like not from America and you're like, what are Americans thinking of? And Katy Perry asks, do you ever feel like a plastic bag? And then they're like, I do. I have felt like a plastic bag.
Right?
And then you're like, just like,
yeah, exactly.
but that's a lyric that would only be in a pop song. Right? Like that's what pop is there for. It's so true because like a lot of people I think try to like bull rush their way into learning a language and a culture by doing language. And it was like one of the things that I always recommended to people like to learn Chinese was like find something you actually like doing outside of language and do that in the other language.
Absolutely.
So like I would watch NBA games and then I would like be watching NBA games in Chinese and then try to figure out what was going on.
Right. It's funny, like you brought up NBA. When I got to Taiwan, being reading 简体字 in Chinese, and I had to figure out 繁体字 in Taiwan. So what happened was at the time, the Final Fantasy VII Remake game had just come out, and I desperately wanted to play it. So I went and bought a used PS4 from some guy on Craigslist or Facebook Market. And then I bought a copy of Final Fantasy VII in Taipei, the computer market. And then I popped it in, and then I realized all the menus are in 繁体字.
Oh, so you got to learn.
And I was like, you know what? There's no way I'm going to spend $60 to buy another copy of this game in English.
No.
I'm just going to learn it.
It's so funny. It's like a lot of things with language are like that. Like you want to do something that's actually very simple. Like sometimes people are like, I really want to get into tea, but I don't speak Mandarin. I'm like, you should learn. And on one hand, it sounds ridiculous to say you should learn a language just to be able to drink better tea. On the other hand, that's the only way anyone ever learns anything is like, I have something I want to do, and I can't do it unless I learn the thing.
I mean, so many people like learn Japanese so that they can watch anime.
Yeah.
Or learn Korean so they can watch K-dramas.
Yeah.
And so... And I think that is a totally valid and useful. I mean, because in the end, language is you have to use it.
Yeah,
it has to be useful in order for you to maintain.
Yeah,
and to use it.
Right? It's a tool, and you need to want to build something with it, or else like what's the point of having all these tools?
Exactly. And then you just forget it, right?
Yeah, love it. That's great, man. Well, we're almost out of time, unfortunately. What did you think about the tea?
It's great.
Was it good?
It really got deeper as you continue to steep it. The first pour was like this really like fruity wash, and now we're kind of in this like heavier but more back of the mouth kind of.
It's good. The good teas, that's part of the thing. It's like every tea is kind of like it does a progression. This is like, you can just throw it in a mug and it'll be good. Right. But if you have the time to sit down and really take your time through it and be able to taste all that, and it's perfect why I invite people over to talk. Because like, you can do it by yourself, but if you have somebody over to talk, you're kind of going through this together without even thinking about it. So thank you again so much for coming, Terry. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun to be able to finally catch up again. And where can people find you?
My Instagram links are down below, and I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I have Douyin and a TikTok as well.
Nice. It was great to be able to share with you, and super excited to be able to get some people to see your music. And I'll be back in Taipei eventually, so I'll see you next time.
We'll definitely hit it up again.
Awesome.
Soon.
Have a good one.
Thanks for having me on.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm Jesse.
I'm Terry.
See you next time.